The wrapping paper was bright and loud, but the silence after he opened his gift was deafening. My son, Leo, sat on the worn Persian rug in my sister-in-law Carol's living room, the garish Santa Claus print of the paper pulled around his small knees. In his hands, he held the box, a medium-sized affair, deceptively promising. It was light. Too light. I'd known, even as Carol handed it to him with that saccharine smile that never quite reached her eyes, that something was amiss. He lifted the lid. Empty. Not even a playful note, a gag coupon for a future gift. Just air. A hollow cardboard echo of the laughter that immediately erupted from his older cousin, Marcus, Carol's son. Guess Santa ran out of presents for you, Leo. Marcus crowed, his own pile of brightly packaged electronics and brand-name toys already a small mountain beside him. A few of the other children giggled, a nervous, uncertain sound. The adults, my husband's siblings, their spouses, suddenly found the Christmas tree ornaments intensely fascinating, or the pattern on their coffee cups worthy of deep study. My own husband, David, caught my eye for a fleeting second, a flicker of discomfort in his, before he too looked away, clearing his throat. He hated confrontation, especially with his sister. I felt the heat climb my neck, a familiar burn of helpless anger. My boy, my sweet Leo. He was only 8. His lower lip trembled, just for an instant, so quick I might have imagined it. But then his face settled into an unnervingly calm mask. His small hands, usually so expressive, rested on the edges of the empty box. His eyes, though, those clear blue eyes, weren't blank. They were watchful, absorbing the room's reaction, cataloging each averted gaze, each muffled snicker. He didn't cry. He didn't throw the box. He simply placed the lid back on, carefully, as if it contained something fragile after all. My heart ached. This wasn't the first time Carol had orchestrated a moment like this, a subtle, deniable barb aimed at Leo and, by extension, at me. Last Easter, all the cousins had received elaborate chocolate bunnies, while Leo got a small, plain bar, the kind you buy at the checkout counter. Oh, dear, Carol had said, her voice dripping with false concern. I must have mixed them up. Leo, you don't mind, do you, sweetie? Chocolate is chocolate. He'd shaken his head, mumbled it's okay, but I'd seen the way his eyes clouded over. I remembered him, just last year, carefully saving his pocket money for weeks. Not for a toy he desperately wanted, but for a small packet of wildflower seeds for Mrs. Henderson down the hall, because he'd overheard her saying she missed having a garden. He'd presented them to her in a painstakingly decorated envelope, his face glowing with a shy pride. He'd come home that day, his small chest puffed out, telling me, "Mommy, Mrs. Henderson said I made her day." That was my Leo, a boy whose heart was so much bigger than his small frame. And now this casual cruelty, dressed up as a family gathering. I wanted to scream, to snatch that empty box and demand Carol explain herself. But what would I say? She'd feign innocence, of course. Oh, it must have fallen out. It was just a little trinket anyway, a joke. And I would be the one making a scene, the oversensitive mother. The familiar paralysis set in, the suffocating weight of wanting to protect him, yet feeling utterly powerless against these undercurrents of passive aggression. David, bless him, would later say, "She doesn't mean it, honey. It's just Carol." But it wasn't just Carol. It was a slow erosion of my son's spirit, and I felt like I was standing by, watching it happen. Leo pushed himself up from the floor, the empty box still in his hands. He walked, not towards me as I'd half expected, half hoped, but out of the living room. The chatter, which had tentatively resumed, died down again. Every eye followed his small, retreating back. I held my breath. Was he going to his little makeshift bed in the spare room to cry? Was the composure finally cracking? I could feel the gazes of the other adults on me now, curious, perhaps a little pitying, or maybe just waiting for the drama to unfold. Carol had a small, almost imperceptible smirk playing on her lips. The silence stretched. I could hear the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a sound usually drowned out by the festive noise. Then, footsteps. Leo reappeared in the doorway. He wasn't empty-handed. In his grasp, he held something small, wrapped carefully in a piece of white tissue paper, the kind I kept for delicate ornaments. He didn't look at me. His gaze was fixed, his expression serious, determined. He walked directly over to Marcus, who was still fiddling with the remote control of a new drone, a smirk lingering on his face. Marcus looked up, surprised, as Leo stopped in front of him. "This is for you," Leo said, his voice quiet but clear in the suddenly silent room. He held out the small, tissue-wrapped offering. Marcus stared at it, then at Leo, then back at the little package. His smirk faltered, replaced by a look of genuine confusion. "For me? Why?" Leo didn't answer the why. He just kept holding out the gift. Hesitantly, Marcus put down his drone controller and took it. He fumbled with the tissue paper, his usual boisterous confidence momentarily deserting him. The room was utterly still. Even the younger children seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere, their eyes wide and unblinking. I remembered another Christmas, 2 years ago. Leo had been 6. He'd spent weeks making little clay figures for everyone, lopsided snowmen, slightly skewed reindeer. He'd been so proud. When he'd given Carol hers, a little angel with uneven wings, she glanced at it, said, "Oh, that's creative, Leo," and then promptly put it aside, turning her attention to a more expensive-looking gift someone else had given her. Later, I'd seen it on a side table, already gathering dust, his small, hopeful heart effectively discarded with it. He hadn't cried then either, just grown very quiet. But I saw the light dim in his eyes. That memory fueled the tremor in my own hands now, watching him, wondering how many more of these small hurts he could endure before something precious in him broke. Marcus finally unwrapped the tissue. Cradled in the paper was a rock. Not just any rock. It was a smooth, gray stone about the size of a robin's egg. Painted on its surface, with a child's earnest precision, was a detailed likeness of a character from Marcus's favorite video game, a warrior with a distinctive helmet and sword. I recognized it instantly. Leo had watched Marcus play that game for hours on previous visits, utterly fascinated, though Marcus rarely let him have a turn. He must have spent ages getting the colors and details right with his little set of acrylic paints. I remembered him asking me a few weeks ago if we could look up pictures of that knight guy with the blue shield online. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. Marcus stared at the painted stone, his mouth slightly open. He turned it over in his fingers. The silence in the room was no longer deafening. It was heavy, thick with unspoken things. The boisterous laughter was gone, replaced by an almost reverent hush. Carol's smile was frozen on her face. Her eyes, for the first time, looked uncertain. Uncle Jim, her husband, shifted uncomfortably in his armchair, his gaze fixed on the small, painted rock in his son's hand. My other sister-in-law, Sarah, caught my eye and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a hint of something like awe in her expression. Even David looked stunned, his earlier discomfort replaced by a dawning understanding. Marcus looked up at Leo, his earlier arrogance completely gone. You made this?" he stammered. Leo nodded, a tiny, almost shy movement. "I know you like Commander Valerius," he said softly. "I saw you trying to get his special shield in the game last time. It was such a small thing, a painted rock. It cost nothing but time and attention. Yet, in that moment, it felt more valuable than all the expensive, shrink-wrapped presents combined. It was a gift of observation, of memory, of pure, unselfish thought. Given in the face of mockery, it was an act of incredible grace. I thought of all the times Leo had been on the periphery, quietly observing, while other children, louder and more demanding, took center stage. I remembered him at a school fair last spring. He'd won a small ribbon for his miniature garden display, a shoebox filled with tiny succulents he'd nurtured for months. He'd been so proud, his face alight. But then a classmate had won a much larger trophy for a science project, and in the flurry of adult congratulations, Leo and his little ribbon were all but forgotten. I'd found him later, standing alone by his display, the ribbon clutched in his hand, his smile gone. I'd hugged him and told him how proud I was, but I knew, deep down, that my words hadn't entirely erased the sting of being overlooked. I'd carried that guilt, that feeling of having failed to shield him, for months. Now, watching him stand there, small and resolute, offering this simple, profound gift, I realized he didn't always need my shielding. He had a strength, a quiet resilience, that I was only just beginning to comprehend. He hadn't retaliated, hadn't dissolved into tears, hadn't even registered the insult in a way they expected. He had simply responded with kindness, an act so unexpected, so disarming, it had completely reframed the ugly moment. Marcus continued to stare at the rock. He didn't say thank you. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, slowly, he closed his hand around the stone, carefully, as if it were precious. He looked at the empty box Leo had received, then back at the mountain of his own gifts. A flush crept up his neck, a dull red that spoke of shame, or perhaps, just perhaps, the first stirrings of a different kind of understanding. Carol finally broke the silence, her voice a little too bright, a little too forced. "Well, isn't that sweet of Leo? Such an artistic boy." But the words fell flat. No one met her gaze. The power she had wielded so casually moments before had evaporated, leaving behind a residue of discomfort and embarrassment that clung to the festive air. Leo didn't wait for a response from Marcus or anyone else. He simply turned and walked back towards me. His face was still composed, but as he drew closer, I could see the faint tension around his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands that he quickly tucked into his pockets. He had done something incredibly brave, incredibly difficult, and it had taken a toll. He reached me, standing beside my chair. I didn't say anything. I just reached out, put my arm around his small shoulders, and pulled him close. He leaned into me, a small, warm weight, and for a moment, we just stayed like that, the hushed conversations of the room a distant murmur. I bent my head, my lips close to his ear. "I saw everything, Leo," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "Everything." He squeezed my hand, a tiny pressure that spoke volumes. He knew I understood. He knew I'd seen not just the slight, but his quiet, courageous response. He'd seen the hollow gesture and chosen to fill it with something genuine. The wrapping paper from all the other gifts was still bright and loud, strewn across the floor in colorful disarray, but what he gave back, that small, painted stone, born of quiet observation and a generous heart, was louder. It resonated in the sudden stillness, a clear, pure note that shamed the discord and, for a moment, made everything else fade into insignificance. In that quiet act, my son hadn't just given a gift, he'd taught us all something about grace. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that he would be all right. More than all right,